You'll know how often you hear conversations around the sexual violence that men inflict on women in our society, how often women are victims of that violence by men. But we also know that men are also victims of sexual violence by men and the huge trauma this leaves as they try to come to terms with this, what had happened to them. One of the problems, of course, is simply confronting this, of telling what has happened to them. There's a conversation around how maybe men battle to understand that they can be victims and survivors too. Martin Pelders is the founder of a new organization that is trying to help men. It's called Matrixmen. Martin, good afternoon to you. You have your own story here about what happened to you and how difficult it was for you to deal with it. And we know that you are not alone. You found other people. There are many other men who are also victims of sexual abuse by men. And yet it's not something that we talk about in society very often.
Yes, good afternoon, Stephen, and thanks for the opportunity. Yes, it's not something that we men like to talk about. It's something that's taboo, and we have this fallacy in this country and around the world is that cowboys don't cry, and men can't be victims. Men are only perpetrators. And the sad truth is that it's not only men that perpetrate on boys; it's women as well. In fact, the larger proportion of perpetration on boys is in fact by women. So, quite often in that situation, it is deemed that the young boy is lucky. I mean, you're 13 or 14 years old, and this 40, 50-year-old woman has given you this experience of a lifetime, and we don't actually realize how badly it impacts on our lives going forward.
It is particularly younger men, and I suppose I mean teenage boys who are the most vulnerable. I mean, to attack from both genders.
Well, yes. I mean, we have, with the advent of smartphones, I mean, these boys are walking around with a device that has access to just about anything on the internet. And of course, porn is one of those things. So we're finding people are watching porn from the age of sort of 8, 9 years old now, are being exposed to that. And a lot of perpetration is in fact happening by peers, boys that are 4 or 5 years older. So there's a lot of that sort of thing happening. Sadly, our biggest problem is that society kind of depicts this as a girls-only problem. We only talk about girls, whereas in South Africa, in fact, more boys are sexually abused by the age of 18 than girls. Sadly, this is research. 2 different research projects have shown us that. And we're not talking about these things. When you look at all the facilities, they're all geared towards girls or women. So nothing is really set up for the boy child, and nobody's actually speaking about the fact that young boys can be sexually abused, raped, molested, and so on. So there's a huge gap. We have approximately 365,000 boys per year are being sexually abused, and really no place for them to go and talk about this.
Martin, I just need to ask a bit more about this research that you say shows that more boys are sexually assaulted than girls by the age of 18. This is, I have to tell you, the first time that I hear that stat. Where does that come from?
So this is a study that was done in 2006. It was called the 13,915 Reasons for Equity in Health. And the reason why they actually set about doing this research, because we had at the time the AIDS denialism that was happening in South Africa. And they were looking for a correlation between the spread of HIV/AIDS and sexual abuse. And when I spoke to one of the researchers, I said, "Did you find it?" And he said, "Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. We found that 44% of all boys had suffered sexual abuse by the age of 18, 41% of them being perpetrated on by women, 27% by men and women, and 32% of them had been perpetrated on by men." And when I turned around to him and I said to him, "But Ari, what is the most shocking thing that you got out of all this research?" His response was that boys are 4 times more likely to perpetrate a rape because it happened to them. So we kind of see from this the escalating problem that we have in this country with sexual violence. And unfortunately, we're focusing on the victims and not focusing on repairing the boys, the broken boys that are coming out of this. So we need to start shifting our focus. We need to start looking at the children and healing them and talking to them and getting them fixed before we're actually going to make any sort of dent in the sexual crimes numbers in this country.
We understand a sort of perpetual cycle of abuse. Someone who's abused, particularly as a young person, as a child, as a teenager, seems to be much more likely to abuse. And you talk about the intervention that we need to make. The first problem is getting people to talk about it. And this is a life-defining moment, the sort of horror, the trauma of it for a young person. That makes it really difficult to sort of get to grips with it, to even start an intervention. You simply often just don't know that it happens.
Absolutely, Stephen. And I think when we're going to, we're in Women's Month at the moment. So if we look at all the advertising that surrounds Women's Month, it's always going to be about women getting beaten up by men. That age-old, that classic picture of the woman cowering in the corner, the big hairy fist imposing and threatening. We're not talking about the fact that men too are victims of gender-based violence. Truth is, we don't know what numbers because no research is done, or very little research is done into that area. But the same thing, what upsets me most about this is we had another study done in 2016 called the Optimus study, which again proved that 36.9% of boys are sexually abused by age 16 and 33% of girls are sexually abused by age 16. Yet the focus is always on the girl child. And then again, you walk into a rape crisis center, that classic picture, the young girl cowering in the corner and the imposing manly figure about to hurt her. We need to start changing that narrative. We need to start changing that picture and have a young boy there with a woman imposing or a man imposing, So we need to start breaking down, that word gender. It suddenly changes its meaning when it's got based violence behind it, or child abuse suddenly means girls and not boys and girls, So there's a lot that we need to start changing, and we need to start being realistic about what actually is happening in this country.
Martin Pelders, thank you, founder at Matrixmen. It's a complicated conversation.